Hi guys, I hope you've had fun learning with Grandmaster Timar. The next topic we're going to go over is forks. And what is a fork? Well, we all know we eat with them, but a fork in chess is a move where one piece attacks two other pieces simultaneously. Let's take a look at what this means. Let's say we start out with the move e4, opponent plays e5, we play knight f3, developing our knight to the middle of the board, like we learned. Knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6. We're going to continue on with a couple of developing moves here. Knight c3. Now black's going to play a bad move here, bishop d6. Kind of a mistake, but it's a move a lot of beginners play. Let's see what happens. White plays d4. And now black makes another kind of questionable move. He plays knight to b4. Now, in this position, what we're going to see is that white can create a fork. And an interesting thing about forks is that any piece can create a fork. Not just a rook, not just a queen, but even your king can create a fork. Pawns, knights, bishops, any piece can create a fork. And in fact, in this position, the white pawn plays d captures e5. Now this pawn has created a fork by attacking both the bishop and the knight at the same time. This is a fork. You see our white knight defends the pawn so that the black bishop cannot capture. The two pieces are forked and white is going to win material. Remember, a bishop is worth 3 pawns, a knight is worth 3 pawns. And remember, a pawn, of course, is only worth 1. So here, white's going to win a piece. So remember I said that any piece can create a fork. A very common fork, especially in beginner games, is known as the fried liver trap. Knight c6. Bishop c4. Good developing moves, bringing all the pieces toward the middle of the board, just like we learned. Black plays knight f6. White plays knight g5. And black plays d6 here. Now, these aren't the best moves for black exactly, but it's moves that a lot of beginners play. And here what we're going to see is that white can play the move knight takes f7, forking the queen and the rook. And the king cannot capture the knight because the bishop is defending it. So, first we saw how the pawn could fork. Now we see how the knight can fork. And the knight is especially tricky when it comes to forks because he can jump over pieces. He doesn't have to have an open line. So that makes the knight very, very dangerous when it comes to forks. If at some point the knight forks the king and the queen, this is called a royal fork because the king and the queen are both royalty. Now if a king and a queen and a rook are all forked, this one's called a family fork. And this happens a lot more often than you would think. There's a whole lot of different basic traps, and we'll go over a couple of those in just a minute. The c7 square is undefended, and it's very easy for the white knight to just jump right in there. Knight takes c7, which is check, forking the king and the rook. Boom, white wins the rook for a knight. An opening that I used to always fall for when I was a beginner was the Surratt attack, like I said before. Surratt. It starts off when my opponent had the white pieces, he would play d4, I would play d5. He would play knight c3. And I really didn't understand what he was doing. I played knight f6. He played bishop f4. I'd play e6. And now here my opponent would play knight b5. And I never could figure out exactly what he was trying to do, so I'd play something like bishop b5 check, or b4 check. My opponent would play c3. I'd run away with my bishop, and then he would capture my pawn. Once again, another knight fork, going after the king and the rook. So the most common forks, especially in the opening, by the knight are on the c7 and the f7 squares. Those squares tend to be very vulnerable, so make sure that you castle your king early to help guard that f7 square. And keep an eye on the knights, because the knights like to jump in and make sneaky forks. Remember how I said that any piece can fork? Well, what about your king? The king seems to be pretty useless when you think about it. He doesn't move very well, doesn't move very far, and he doesn't have a lot of attacking power. He also has to be kept safe, because if he's put in checkmate, we lose the game. Well, here we're going to see how the king can be extremely useful, creating a fork. In this position, you see, white just moved the black knight from e7 to d5, putting white in check. Black thinks he's doing pretty well here, because he's up a knight for a pawn. That means he has an advantage of about 2 pawns. Well, here white's going to turn the tables on him by playing the move king to d4. This forks the knight and the rook, and of course, since the rook is more valuable than the knight, we're going to move the rook to save it. We'll say rook to c7, after which white will capture the knight, and now white's up a pawn, and he clearly has the upper hand. How about the queen? The queen is very strong. In fact, queen forks can happen very, very early in the game. Now, one important thing to remember is that your queen does not belong in the middle of the board or attacking your opponent until well after the 7th or 8th move. The knights, the bishops, your king should be castled, maybe even a rook or two developed before your queen's ready to go. Now, of course, in chess we have a lot of exceptions to rules, so sometimes it's okay to bring the queen out early if she can do a whole lot of damage to your opponent. We'll take a look at a certain opening where a lot of this happens. Queen forks, queen attacks. In fact, a queen attack with just the queen, without help from other pieces, we call that a queen raid. The queen runs in kind of like a pirate, and she raids the black side, grabs some material, and comes running back to safety. Because, of course, the queen is so powerful, if she's attacked by, say, a knight, a bishop, or a pawn, she's got to run away. So, let's see what we can do. Alright, so let's say we start out with our favorite move, e4. We play e4, our opponent plays e5, we play knight f3. Now, of course, we've played this so many times, we understand that the knight is attacking the pawn, and black has to choose a way to defend it. Now, there's 2 very common ways he chooses to defend this. One by playing knight to c6 to defend that pawn. The other by playing d6. That helps defend the pawn there. Now, white also tends to sometimes play knight f6 here. This is called the Russian defense. That knight is attacking our pawn. So, you see, it's kind of a counterattack. If we take his pawn, he takes ours. You know, that's just the way it works. Well, let's say that your opponent plays f6. Now, this is what's called the Damiano defense, and it is a terrible move. White has what's called a sacrifice. A sacrifice is where we give up a little bit of extra material for a positional advantage. We'll see that in a minute. In this situation, white can play the move knight takes e5. Now, yes, we remember that a knight is worth 3 pawns. Of course, a pawn is only worth a pawn. But this move sets up a very, very tough position for black. And in fact, we win the material back right away. Alright, let's play black recaptures that pawn. F takes e5. Well, what do? Well, here comes the queen fork. Queen h5. Check. Check to the king and also attacking that e5 pawn. Now, black's got 2 choices. He can move the king, or he can block the check with g6 here. Let's say he plays g6. Well, remember, we were forking the king and the pawn, so we can take that pawn for free. And guess what? That's another fork. Forking the king and the h8 rook. So after black blocks the check with knight e7, we win the rook. And now we see that white has won a rook and a pawn for a knight. In fact, a rook and 2 pawns for a knight. So we won 7 for 3. That's a pretty good trade if you ask me. So white should easily win this game. So just out of curiosity, let's see what would happen if instead of blocking the check with g6, black tries to run away. Let's say he plays king e7. Well, this gets him into a whole basket load of trouble. Queen takes e5 check first. King f7. Bishop c4 check. developing another piece and attacking the king. King g6, queen f5 check, h6. And now the move d4, which opens up the bishop's attack onto the king. This is called a discovery, and we'll examine this later on. So we see that black is in a whole lot of trouble here. There's bishops and queens attacking his king. This isn't so good for him. So the fork that we saw before was probably his best bet to get out of the problem. But the forks with the queen's very dangerous when it comes to forking. She can go across the board, she can go along diagonals, and as we saw here, she went along a diagonal in a straight line, a diagonal and a straight line. Very, very difficult to defend against queen forks. Now what about the other pieces? Rook forks. Rook forks are pretty straightforward, but they're very helpful because they can go all the way across the board. For example, let's say there was a black king or a white king on h5 and a white knight on a5. Well, this black rook on d5 forks both of them. This is a very critical idea because these pieces so far apart, you'd think they couldn't be attacked at the same time. But a rook, or in fact a queen, while we're thinking about it, could fork either one of them. Boom. Black wins a piece here because the king must move. Boom. A popular opening called the Sicilian defense. Knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, e6, knight c3. Now let's say that here black plays an interesting move, bishop to b4. White plays the move bishop e2, and here white plays the move queen a5. Now, what black is doing here is he's doubling up the pressure onto this knight. You see, if it were his turn, he would play bishop takes c3, which is check. Now, technically this is a fork. It's forking a pawn and a knight here. This is a very common pattern that in different openings, it will lead to very, very powerful forks. This diagonal and this diagonal here. In fact, imagine this b-pawn removed, where the king and the rook are both being forked. This diagonal and this diagonal are very critical in early stages of the game because knights can be pinned to the king here. I'm going to show you a trap that I fell for one time. I was playing a game against a Russian friend of mine. His name was Artem Oborovich. And Artem, he caught me in a silly little trap. I had started out d4, d5, c4. This opening, this is called the Queens Gambit. Very, very popular opening. We'll learn more about that later. My opponent played e6, defending his pawn. I played knight c3, and he played bishop to b4. Kind of an odd move choice. I hadn't really seen this before. I thought this was kind of a crazy move. I played knight f3. He played knight f6. Bishop to g5. Now see, he's pinning my knight to my king. I'm pinning his knight to his queen. Seems pretty even, right? Well, here Artem got me. He played c6. I played e3, wanting to let this bishop out. He played queen to a5. So now see, he's pinning that knight once again, and his threat, if he's allowed, is going to be to play bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and queen takes c3. Now, this is a queen fork, but it was set up by the bishop fork. The bishop pin turns into a bishop fork, going after the king and the pawn here. This looks actually pretty scary for me. And this turned into kind of a multi-piece fork. Sometimes one of your pieces is attacking one piece, and another one of your pieces is attacking another piece. This is a kind of fork. It's also most of the time a discovered attack, like we saw before, and we'll get to that here in a minute. But I thought this one was very instructional here. So he played queen a5. I played bishop to d3, and this was a pretty big mistake on my part. He played the move knight to e4. So he's attacking my bishop and my pinned knight. See, my bishop, or his bishop pins my knight to my king. I didn't really see a big problem, and I castle here. But that, in fact, was a huge mistake, because right away he played knight takes g5, I played knight takes g5, and now he created that multi-piece fork / discovered attack. D takes e4. So the pawn on c4 is attacking the bishop while his queen is opened up on the knight. That's a fork by the pawn and the queen. It's also a discovered attack with the pawn moving out of the way, letting the queen come onto the knight. So we kind of got away from the topic of pure bishop forks. But real quick, one of the most common pure bishop forks is on the c3 square, believe it or not, or the c6 square. Because this bishop capturing a knight, usually, on this square, results in a fork of the king and the rook. This is a very common fork in beginning games. Don't be the one to fall for it. Make sure you watch anywhere a bishop can move. See, look, he's even forking 3 pieces here. The rook, the king, and the pawn. The bishop, he can move a long way. Make sure you don't fall into these kinds of forks.